It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 9, printed in Part A of House Report 107-450. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 9, printed in Part A of House Report Number 107-450, offered by Mr. Paul of Texas.
Pursuant to House Resolution 415, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Paul, and a member opposed, each will control 10 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield myself such time as I may consume. First, I would like to thank the co-sponsors of this amendment, Mr. Barr of Georgia, Mr. Cannon, Mr. Duncan of Tennessee, Mr. Good of Virginia, Mr. Sessions of Texas, Mr. Womp, and Mr. Weldon of Florida. And I appreciate their support on this amendment. This amendment is not complex at all. Matter of fact, it's a sense of Congress resolution that is put in the bill. And it says, it is the sense of Congress that none of the funds appropriated pursuant to authorizations or appropriations in this Act should be used for any assistance to or to cooperate with or to provide any support for the International Criminal Court. It's to urge the President not to use any funds for the International Court. I'd like it to be a mandate. It isn't, but it's still very, very important, and I think this sends a message to our servicemen that they will never have to be taken into court against their will in the International Criminal Court. Now, on December 31st, right before the last day the treaty, the Rome Convention, could be signed, our President signed this convention. But it has never been ratified. It hasn't been brought to the Senate. He didn't intend it to. It was too late, and our President now does not have any intention. And you might say, well, why worry about it? But just recently, we all know that the President has essentially rescinded the signature on this treaty, and to make the point that we don't want our servicemen called in and tried in the International Criminal Court as war criminals. So it's a protection of the servicemen. But the interesting thing is that under this Rome Convention, the agreement is once 60 nations sign the treaty, it goes into effect. And even with what the President did by rescinding the signature and saying we don't want any part of it, we are still under international law under the understanding that our servicemen could be called into International Criminal Court. And we have to make this message very loud and clear. This is not overly strong, but I think we should make this message and say that none of these funds should be spent, but we still have to offer protection to our personnel that they never be called into this International Criminal Court. To me, it's an issue of national sovereignty. And it's an issue that's important to a lot of Americans. National sovereignty is an issue. That's what should be our job, is to protect our country. And for this reason, I think this is very important, and I hope I can get all of you to agree with this and pass this. And I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from New York.
Mr. Chairman, I claim the time in opposition to the...
The gentleman is recognized for 10 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to the amendment introduced by the honorable gentleman from Texas that would prohibit the use of funds to assist, cooperate with, or provide any support to the International Criminal Court. The International Criminal Court is a reality, as the gentleman has stated. The Rome Statute, the treaty establishing the court, has been ratified by the 60 countries needed for the court to come into existence, as has been stated as well. The court will function with or without the United States support or participation, and a prohibition on U.S. support will not protect the very same American citizens the gentleman from Texas wishes to protect from the court's jurisdiction. In fact, our lack of participation in the court's mechanism will harm U.S. national interests by making it impossible for the United States to affect the development of the court. We will thus be completely unable to protect any Americans that do find themselves before this court. Opponents of the court argue that U.S. servicemen and women will be subject to politically motivated trials. But since national courts have primary jurisdiction, and since the U.S. military is committed to fully investigating any charges of war crimes committed by U.S. military personnel, the military, in my opinion, has nothing to fear from an ICC prosecutor run amok. The case of U.S. Army Sergeant Frank Runge, proves that U.S. servicemen have nothing to fear from international tribunals. Rongi was accused of raping and murdering 11-year-old Kosovo girl. Despite the fact that the ICTY statute gives the tribunal primacy over national courts' own jurisdiction, the United States faced no obstacles from the tribunal to launching its own investigation, conducting its own court-martial, and eventually sentencing Sergeant Rongi according to the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Earlier this week, as stated by the gentleman from Texas, the Bush administration announced that it would remove the United States signature from the Rome Statute, an unprecedented step that has damaged the moral credibility of the United States and serves as a U.S. repudiation of the notion that war criminals and perpetrators of genocide should be brought to justice. The unsigning of the statute will not protect American citizens from being brought before the court. And furthermore, our rejection of the court encourages autocratic leaders to ignore their own international commitments. It will also make it more difficult for the United States to ensure that war criminals from Iraq, Sudan, Liberia, Sierra Leone, Cambodia, and other countries face justice for their atrocities. The administration's unsigning of the Rome Statute places the United States in the company of notorious human rights abusers like Iraq, North Korea, China, Cuba, Libya, and Burma. By approving the amendment in question, Congress would add insult to injury by further repudiating the International Criminal Court, which is an important instrument of international justice. Mr. Chairman, the resolution being discussed today would hinder U.S. national interests. Ironically, by preventing the United States from cooperating with the court in any way, it will actually endanger, in my opinion, American lives. It would, for example, prohibit Defense Department officials from responding to court investigators when they ask for information that could help exonerate an American serviceman brought before the court. It would also prevent a member of the U.S. Armed Forces from testifying in support of our NATO allies who do support this court. And finally, it would prevent us from supporting a trial of a figure as notorious as Saddam Hussein, were he to be brought before this court for crimes against humanity. According to this amendment, the United States should not support the court with intelligence, information, and legal expertise that could convict someone like Saddam Hussein and his cronies of crimes against humanity. Despite the fact that the administration itself has already embarked on an ambitious effort to build a war crimes case against Saddam Hussein and his associates. And finally, Mr. Speaker, this amendment would hinder our ability to wage war on terrorism. We have asked virtually every country in the world to support the implementation of U.S. domestic laws designed to combat terrorism on such things as terrorist money laundering. Now with this amendment, Congress is refusing to cooperate with the international community in its effort to bring war criminals and terrorists to justice. Mr. Chairman, this amendment accomplishes very little. The administration has already stated its intent not to cooperate with this court. Endorsing the amendment would only put Congress on the record as having prevented the United States from cooperating with an institution that will help promote the rule of law. And I urge my colleagues to oppose this amendment. And I reserve the balance of my time.
Will the gentleman yield for a second?
Yes, I will yield.
I'd just like to associate myself with the remarks the gentleman has just made. I believe that the best way to protect our U.S. servicemen is to become part of the International Criminal Court and thereby retain our complementarity, which allows us to try our own soldiers before they'd ever be tried by an international criminal court, thus protecting our own soldiers. Whereas if we don't sign and don't go ahead with the criminal court, we really subject our soldiers to this court without the protections that our signing would allow us to have.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield 2 minutes to Mr. Barr from Georgia.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the chairman, and I thank the distinguished gentleman from Texas for yielding time in support of this very important amendment. The previous speakers are operating in some Alice in Wonderland world. Let me see if I can get this straight. It's hard to even diagram it out, their logic or lack thereof. We have an international criminal court, or a court that calls itself an international criminal court. not subject to or bound by the constitutional guarantees that would otherwise in every instance apply to United States servicemen and women and citizens and those who commit crimes in this country, even though they're not citizens. And yet they're saying that because the United States has renounced the improper signature of a previous chief executive in this country, that our men and women would therefore not be subject to protections. Well, of course we're not going to be subject to the protections offered by the International Criminal Court because we're not subject to it. That's the whole point of this amendment. The whole point of this amendment is to say that our men and women, our policy makers, our commanders, those who order our men and women into harm's way to protect our national security interests that might run afoul of some foreign dictator, that might go to the International Criminal Court and seek to have bogus charges brought against our men and women, would somehow not be protected because we have not signed or deemed ourselves not bound by this criminal court. Where is the logic in that?
Would the gentleman yield on that question?
There's no more logic in that than there would be in saying that we ought to subject our men and women to the International Criminal Court in the first place, Mr. Chairman. The fact of the matter is that the Bush administration took a very bold step. Yes, it is unprecedented, but the signing of this International Criminal Court treaty by the prior administration in the waning days of the prior administration's tenure in office was itself unprecedented and improper. And I commend the Bush administration for saying that we shall not be bound. Our policymakers, our men and women in uniform should not be bound by this kangaroo court. And I commend the gentleman from Texas.
Do you want another minute? I yield another minute.
The gentleman's recognized for an additional minute.
I commend the gentleman from Texas for bringing forth this amendment that says very clearly, and I hope that our colleagues on the other side understand this, yes, it would renounce in a very, very substantive and very concrete way this so-called International Criminal Court. It would, contrary to their illogical arguments that somehow this course of action would deny our men and women protection, it would, in fact, clothe them fully in the protection of our Constitution and not subject them to the lack of protection that they would have if we allowed them in any way, shape, or form to be subject to this foreign international jurisdictional court. So what we are stating here today with this amendment, for which I ask all of our colleagues to support, we're saying that our men and women that go out under that flag will continue to have the protection of that flag, of our Constitution, of our Bill of Rights, and not be subject to some international kangaroo court that folks on the other side may like for some reason. But let us stand up for America, let us stand up for our Bill of Rights, and not subject our men and women to a foreign court that has no jurisdiction.
The gentleman's time has expired.